let me share with you our listeners. Many of them would be considering bringing in a second in command, a general manager, someone to kind of be the person that keeps the trains on the tracks, the elder statesman, the modern elder, so to speak. Maybe a little gray hair to give the company credibility. What advice would you have for an entrepreneur considering hiring someone older than them to be the modern elder inside their company?
Yeah, I think, first of all, the rapport, the emotional rapport is incredibly important. You have to come from a place of trust. And I think what happened with Brian and me is that we pretty quickly saw that we had something to learn from each other. And that's the key. If it's one-sided, so either the young person or the older person sort of like owns all the cards and has all the skill, then it's not going to be a very good relationship. It'll be a great relationship if it's symbiotic and my yin to his yang makes sense. We fit together. Like, I knew something about leadership and emotional intelligence. I knew EQ. Brian knew technology and DQ, so digital intelligence. And so we fit together really well in that way. So I think that's one piece. I think also getting really clear. I said to Brian early on when I screwed up in a meeting, like in the first couple of months, like halfway through the meeting, the leadership meeting, I sort of interrupted him and said, Brian, I really think, you should do the following. And it was in terms of how he was going to run the meeting, not in terms of a decision or anything like that. Like anybody in the room could talk about, how a decision you can make. But I was saying, like, here's how you should run the meeting. So in essence, it was like dad stepping in. And so after that point, I realized, I'm going to mentor privately and intern publicly. So if I'm a mentor and an intern, when I need to give some counsel and guidance, I'm going to do that discreetly. And when I need to actually look like an idiot and ask really provocative questions, and sometimes be the dumbest person in the room, but the wisest one, because I ask a question that shows a blind spot, I'll do that publicly because I don't mind that. But the last thing I need to do is to make my boss and mentee, Brian, feel like he's got his dad in the room.
And did he call you out on that?
He called me out, not in the meeting. Afterwards he did. And he also called me out.
What did he say?
He just said, listen, I mean, he was upset. And he was upset because there was a sense that people are going to look to me in the meeting to be, the person who knows how to run a meeting. And he was right. He also was right when in the San Francisco Chronicle, they had an article. For the first 6 months, we kept it embargoed that I was there. I mean, some people knew, but we didn't let the press know because we needed to see if Brian and I could get along. Because we didn't want, because the press would stir things up. Like, oh, Chip's there. Chip's going to become the CEO. And I didn't want to become the CEO. And I didn't want Brian to have worry that I'm just sort of going to be clandestinely trying to take over his company. So what was interesting was we got to a place where I just felt comfortable with Brian having a Saturday afternoon talk every week. And we would talk about the relationship, not just the business, but how our relationship worked. There was a San Francisco Chronicle article that came out that sort of announced that I was there. And in it, I made Brian sound like, in the article, in a subtle way, I made Brian sound like he wasn't ready to be CEO of the company yet. I never said those words, and the article didn't say it in that way. But it was enough that it sort of worried him that I was signaling that I needed to be the gray hair because, he doesn't know what he's doing. And I didn't feel that way. I definitely felt like I was the gray hair, but I didn't feel like he didn't know what he was doing. I felt like my job was to be a wisdom accelerant, like how to accelerate his wisdom. From there forward, I was really cautious about how I talked about Brian externally and internally, because I didn't want to feel like I'm the training wheels on his bike. Someday he'll be able to ride the bike alone. He had been riding the bike alone before I got there. But he wanted to ride a lot faster and he wanted to ride a bigger bike. And he wanted to ride not just with millennials on a budget. And part of my job was like, okay, how are we going to go after luxury travelers? How are we going to go after corporate travelers? And so part of my job was to help mainstream who our hosts and our guests were.